I used to play in the woods all the time when I was a kid. They were my safe place, away from noise, a place I could go to let my imagination run wild and have my thoughts feel free rather than confined. Time marches on, however, and as I entered my teenage years, I'd visit those woods less and less. Pretty soon, what was once a place of serenity and childhood memories became nothing more than a memory itself. I just didn't have time for the forts anymore. Same with the roaming trips to the creek. I just grew up, I guess. It wasn't a painful departure, I must say. It was more like realizing your toys aren't sentient, you're giving them the voices. That's how the woods began to feel as time went on. I realized that my imagination was distracting me from real-life responsibilities, school, work, social life, etc. I had to stifle it. Time continued to pass, and eventually in my 20s, I moved out of my parents' home and got an apartment in the city. I worked as an accountant and just wanted to be closer to work. Don't get me wrong, I loved those city lights. The sound of cars honking, the hustle and bustle and constant movement. It became the new normal. It's where I became successful, where I came into my own and made a name for myself, even if it was just, well, for myself. An accountant at some random bank in some random city isn't really fame and fortune, but it did mean a lot to me, knowing that I had become secure in life. That's where I stayed for 10 years, in that apartment in the city, alone. 10 long years of silence in my head. However, on my 32nd birthday, I got the call that changed the trajectory of my life and forced me back to the countryside from whence I came. I'll never forget my aunt's hysteria. Her uncontrolled sobs that made my blood run cold and my heart dropped in my stomach. My parents had been killed, brutally, and my aunt had discovered them. Now, just because I didn't live with them anymore didn't mean I didn't keep in contact with them, didn't love them still. Wasn't heartbroken and utterly destroyed by the news my aunt wailed to me. I was so confused. I had just been texting my mom the night prior. She was setting up plans for my birthday. She always liked going out to eat at a restaurant of my choosing for that day. No matter how old you are, you'll always be my baby, she'd tell me. We'd been in the middle of discussing which restaurant we'd go to this year when the conversation abruptly shifted. Instead of responding to my question of Longhorn or Outback, my mom simply texted, "I miss you so much. Please come home." I was 31 years old, a grown man. My mom had come to terms with me leaving 10 years ago when I first stepped out of her house. As a matter of fact, she welcomed it. She saw it as her job being done. She saw it as more time with my father. I responded, "I miss you too. Anything wrong? I'll see you guys tomorrow, right?" There was a 5-minute wait before my mom's response, and I spent that time watching those little gray text bubbles bounce up and down from her side of the messages. When she finally responded, it was 2 words. "Come home." Confused, but not yet worried, I responded with, "I'll see what I can do tomorrow. Maybe I'll spend the weekend with you guys." I got the notification that my message had been read, but no response came from my mother. I figured we'd pick back up tomorrow, and with that thought in mind, I decided to call it a night. And of course, you already know what ended up happening. Apparently, my aunt had discovered them along the tree line, just lying there, mangled and bloody as flies circled their corpses. At least, that's what I imagined was happening. My aunt was too broken up to go into detail farther then. They were dead in the woods. Of course, this called for a trip back home. A long drive back to the countryside of Georgia. The deep countryside of Georgia, near the Blue Ridge Mountains. I called into work and reported the news, and my boss sympathetically gave me all the time I needed to recover. "Be back when you feel like you can be back," he told me. I thanked him profusely and packed a bag for the next few days. I didn't know how long I'd be there, but I did know I wanted to be prepared. On the drive, skyscrapers morphed into suburbs, and suburbs into fields, and fields into forests. I began to feel a little nostalgic, remembering my time in this environment. In this setting where life was smaller and simpler, I remembered how my parents walked me through life, encouraged me to grow and expand my surroundings. Tree after tree passed by my window, and eventually my thoughts landed on the time I spent in those woods near my house. I began to tear up because it felt like that childhood was officially gone. All I had left was memories. Before I knew it, I found myself sobbing as my car rolled on down the highway. After about 3 hours of driving, my wheels finally found that dirt road that led to my parents' house. I felt my heart begin to race. I didn't know if I was ready to face this reality, but alas, I trekked on. Pretty soon, that wooden shack of a childhood home came further and further into view, with each part of the house that rose over my dash and into my windshield. I felt those damned emotions that overwhelmed my soul and stung my eyes. I pulled into the driveway, and on the porch sat my aunt and uncle. My uncle cradled my aunt in his arms as he rocked her back and forth. I parked my car and jumped out to hurry and greet the two of them, and I could have swore I heard my name being called from over my shoulder. I looked back and found nothing but trees shaking in the crisp night air. Shrugging it off, I approached my aunt and uncle and embraced both of them in a hug. My aunt was still in hysterics, and my uncle was trying his best to comfort her. I sat with the two of them for a while, recalling old memories. We laughed through some of the tears, but for the most part, we were all just completely shocked and grief-stricken. While I sat with them, a thought crossed my mind. "Wait," I said. "Why aren't the police here?" There was a silence that lingered for an uncomfortably long time before my uncle answered me. "Case was open and shut. Their work here is done." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My parents had been killed, and it was just cleaned up in a day. How is that even possible? Is all I could think to ask. "Animal attack. Their wounds were consistent with that of a bear mauling. That's what they labeled it as, and that's what it's gonna be," responded my uncle. I winced at this. Believe it or not, this was not something I wanted to hear. "All right, let's just change the subject. Where are you guys staying tonight? Are you staying?" Dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, my aunt responded with a groggy, "We got a hotel near town. We'll be there through the funeral. What about you?" I thought for a moment. I knew where I wanted to stay, but I didn't know if it was appropriate. Furthermore, I didn't know how these two would take it. "I was thinking to stay here tonight. Just one last time. I think I need to." To my surprise, they didn't argue. They accepted, endeared even. We chatted for a bit longer before saying our goodbyes. I watched as they got into their car, waving at me sympathetically before backing out of the dirt driveway. Their taillights faded down the dirt road, and before long I found myself alone once more. The night air kissed my face, and after a few moments to myself on the front porch, I decided to go inside. The house felt empty. It was fully furnished, but it was just not full. There was an absence that I could feel in my soul. I walked around for a bit, high on nostalgia as I went room to room. Seeing my parents' room hurt the most, and I was only able to look at it for a few moments before my grief made me close the door. The part that stuck with me the most, however, was my childhood bedroom. It had been untouched, right down to the dirty clothes on the floor and the sheets that hung freely off the bed. With a sigh, I fell backwards onto my mattress, and the springs groaned and creaked with the force of my impact. I lay there, curled up in a ball and hugging my blanket tightly. My thoughts were beginning to run together, and I could feel my eyes getting heavier and heavier as I inched closer to sleep. However, before that sleep could arrive, I heard tapping on my window, a quick, tight pat, pat, pat that forced my eyes open and made me aware. Usually, this would be the part in the movie where the knocking abruptly stops. However, in my case, it became quicker, wilder, more forceful. I'm not ashamed to admit I was terrified, almost too terrified to move. At first, I opted to shout out, "Whoever's out there, just know I'm armed. Get off my property or I will shoot you." What responded was a child. "I see yo," it dragged out. With that, I was out of bed and at my window. I peeked out through the curtain, and all I saw was a little boy running into the woods. I couldn't just let him do that, not after what happened to my parents. Grabbing a flashlight and slipping my shoes on, I rushed out the front door to stop the boy. I reached the tree line and stopped. Something told me not to go any further. Something told me that I was making a mistake, but the voice that came from the forest clouded my judgment. "Come play with me again, Donovan," it beckoned. I knew I'd heard my name being called earlier. I knew I wasn't crazy. Against all of my better judgment, I continued into the woods. As I walked, I could hear footsteps that were my own, the crunching of leaves just out of my line of sight. I walked further and further, and as I walked, I stumbled upon something, one of my old forts, one of the last ones I made before I stopped playing in the woods. Inside was me, as a boy, smiling up at me now. His teeth were sharp and flesh was wedged between them. His nails were like talons and had been covered in dirt and blood. And his eyes, oh my God, his eyes. They were a deep crimson, so deep that they'd have looked black had it not been for the moonlight. "You're whom?" it clapped. I stood in place, absolutely petrified. "I knew you'd be back. I knew I'd get you back," it hissed this erratically, as though it were barely able to contain its excitement. The thing began to stand, and finally my body reacted. I ran as fast as my legs would carry me, ducking and dodging branches and roots. To my absolute horror, the thing was keeping my exact pace. It ran beside me, staring at me with its dark eyes and unwavering smile. This spiked my adrenaline, and I don't think I ever ran faster in my life. Not even in varsity track for high school. I was looking at it. The porch lights from my house came into view, and as soon as I reached those front steps, I practically jumped over them to get inside. Retrieving my car keys, I was back in my car and already peeling out of the driveway before even realizing what was happening. I must have been halfway down the dirt road, on my way back to the city before I began to breathe again. Regaining my composure, my hands gripped tightly around the wheel as I drove on through the darkness. I was prepared to never return to that house again, prepared to drive back and forth for the funeral. Whatever it took. However, that tiny little bit of comfort I had in knowing I'd escaped was completely dashed when I heard a voice from my back seat. "Where are we going?" I looked in my rearview mirror, and there he was again, sitting with his hands in his laps and a blank expression pasted to his face. I almost crashed, attempting to pull the car over in my frenzied state, yet once I did, I found that my car was empty. I thought that I was losing my mind. After checking the car like a power-hungry police officer, I finally found it within myself to begin driving again. I made it all the way back to the city without incident. My apartment, though, that's another story entirely. I don't know how he got there. I don't know how he followed me. But he was there. He wouldn't leave. I found him standing still as a statue in my bedroom, staring out the window with his hands behind his back. Once he detected my presence, his head turned a full 180 degrees to face me. "Do you want to play now?" it asked. I slammed the bedroom door and backed away slowly. I could hear footsteps approaching from the other side, but they stopped just before they reached the door. Ever so cautiously, I pushed the door back open. My room was empty, just like the car. Sleep wasn't an option that night. Instead, I chose to stay on my balcony, too afraid to admit that I had actually lost my mind. The next day, my phone began blowing up with calls from my aunt and uncle. They wanted to know where I was. I lied and told them that staying in the house was too painful and that I had decided to return to my apartment. I assured them that I'd be at the funeral and told them that if they needed anything, I'd be there. That entire day, that boy plagued my mind. He wouldn't stop showing up. In the bathroom, in the kitchen. Hell, he'd even managed to follow me to the grocery store. I was the only one that could see him, blood still dripping from his mouth and hands, and I was the only one who seemed to notice. At the funeral, he sat beside me during the service, begging me to play the entire time. He screamed at me, taunted me, berated me with strings of insults. While the rest of my family mourned, I couldn't even cry in peace without this little version of myself begging me to interact with him. This has been happening ever since the death of my parents, and I still have not found a way to get rid of this monstrosity that I'm sure killed them. Even now, as I'm writing this, he's leering over my shoulder, whispering in my ear, begging me to go to the woods with him, and I think I'm finally going to.